So on Mamba Mindset Monday, we're going to be sharing a couple things today. And I appreciate everybody being here, our little discussion, and we'll move right into what our topic is. So last week was Civil Rights Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we talked a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr., and we also shared a little bit about this mindset of money. And what you'll find is there's a lot of things. I mean, I would say that it's fascinating when you look up all the quotes online from Martin Luther King Jr. There's some amazing quotes and some really powerful ones that deal with mindset and moving forward in your life. And there's some really cool stuff around that. So as you look at some of the different things that are shared, there's one of the powerful quotes is the following one that he kind of highlights and talks about. And you'll find that oftentimes, like, there's some really cool stuff if you just go online and search for inspirational quotes. I love the one that he shares about returning hate for hate multiplies hate. Adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. But I think there's some power to that, right? Like, as you start to look at that in your real estate business, you'll find that certain things like create and they multiply. And when you have a certain mindset, you'll see that as well. And so when you have a mindset of fear, like, fear will continue to multiply. If you have a mindset of scarcity, you'll see scarcity multiply. If you have a mindset of abundance, you'll see abundance multiply. It really depends on the mindset that you have, because you'll start to get more of that as you start to focus in as you're moving forward. And last week, we talked a little bit about the mindset of money. And we kind of wrapped up our discussion last week around this concept of once you finally realize how much you're worth, you'll stop giving so many discounts. What I find fascinating is, in today's world, how many people they look at the real estate industry and they start to say to themselves, well, like, our commissions are being contracted. We have this place where our livelihood is being discounted. But I would say the person and the group that is most responsible for the commission contraction in our marketplace is us as a real estate industry. Because we have this mindset that has been permeated throughout our industry where value is where the discounts are. And because of that mindset that's been shared and highlighted, then agents take that concept to note. And so what they start to do is when they meet with clientele and the clients start to question their worth, then the natural response is they start to discount their services. They just start to discount what they offer. And think about that, like, in your world. And I put a post online a little while ago where it talked about that our thought process around how we buy will create the type of clients that we attract. And you'll start to find that your pattern as a consumer is the same type of consumer that you'll attract. And so as you start to become more abundant with that mentality, you'll start to deal with clientele that are more abundant. But if your mindset is dramatically over, or you have this concept of scarcity, you'll start to find clients that are that way too. If you have a mindset of being overly discount, those are the clientele you're going to deal with. And the hard part is, if you can't overcome that mindset for yourself, then good luck trying to help other people do that. It's just not going to happen. In fact, there was an agent that was with us many years ago, and she was like overly scarcity minded. Like, that was like a concept. What's interesting is she came from a family that was super wealthy. Like, her father, extremely, extremely wealthy. But she had this mindset of scarcity. It was fascinating to watch. And she would meet with her clientele, and she'd have her clientele go, and she would tell her clients in the initial consultation, well, I'm going to help you, and I'm going to help you get the best deal possible. And she would take it upon herself to go and beat up everybody. So her lenders that she'd work with, she'd beat them up. And she'd tell her clients, hey, we're gonna get this rate down, we're gonna get this like fee structure down, and we'll get that good faith estimate, and we're gonna just hammer that down. And then with the title company, she would like nickel and dime on whatever fees, like $5 here, $10 there. And then with her home inspector, she would just tell her clients, well, we can get that for less. Like, we're gonna price shop everything. And she would beat down all of her vendors. That was just her mindset. And she felt that she was providing a lot of value to her clients because of how much she was beating everybody else up. She became this like a gladiator in the arena. She was just going to war with everybody. And she felt that this was going to be a huge benefit. But what ended up happening, it didn't take too much time for her clients to be able to have this mindset around money and around like searching for discounts, that they started to turn their attention to her. And they started to ask her for discounts. And I remember she called me up once. I remember I was driving on the road. It was just the road right here by the PG office. I remember exactly where I was when she like called me, and she was super frustrated. And she said, I don't understand. I work so hard for all my clients, and yet they come back and they try to beat me up on price all the time. Like every time I try to list a home, they want me to like do it for free. And then whenever I'm helping them, they want some sort of discount. And she was like really frustrated by that. And I said, you made that, like you created that. Like that's a monster that you built. I said, what's crazy is that you have now a database of people that you've been nurturing and building up that are all like that. And I said, the thing is like, you're like that. Like you have that same mindset when it comes to money, and now your clients are like that. And now you're frustrated because your clients are like you. And you're frustrated because your clients are going to attract more people like them. Like your business is going to be a model of like you're perpetually creating that type of client because that's how you are. So I'm not like, this is not trying to sound rude. I'm like, dude, that's how you find value. And so now you've taught your clients that that's how value is, versus a concept that value is what value is different than just beating everybody up on price. Maybe value is what you can do to help people become more efficient, and time is saving people and become more efficient versus just the economics of it. And it's just a shift in mindset around that. And you start to move your business forward, and we're going to talk a little bit about like what that looks like as you start to shift and adjust and move your business forward. But the challenge I'd give you is start to watch your patterns and habits as you deal with vendors and customers. You start to deal with the people around you. What kind of consumer are you? Because that is the type of person that you'll most likely start to work with. And the thing is, we typically start these calls off with a Kobe Bryant quote, and the quote today is a simple one. It's the one thing you can control. You are responsible for how people remember you or don't. So don't take it lightly. So when you have impact with people, the question is like, how are they going to remember you? Like, how is that moment going to be remembered? Now, I would say that it's easy for us to create memorable experiences with people that we see significance with. Like when we see people that we're like, man, that's a person that has value to me, then you treat that person differently because you want to make sure that you're remembered and you stand out. But how different is it if you start to focus on people who are not like an immediate return on investment or a return on your time? Like how different is that? So I was recently in Las Vegas. I flew back this morning about 1:30 this morning. I was in a mastermind group that I've been with for several years. And this is probably one of the more impactful, high-level mastermind groups. There are a bunch of entrepreneurs that are outside the real estate space, but they are a group of people that push me mentally more than any other group. That when I am around these individuals, they give me some guidance and help of how I can become a better version of me. And they also call me out when I'm playing small, which I really appreciate because I'm trying to become a better version of myself. And it was interesting. One of the person who kind of runs this mastermind group, he was talking about like creating like a really high impact with all the people he has contact with. So one of the nights we went to this restaurant that was nearby. We walked over to it, and it was this really cool, kind of had like a Mexican flair to it. And before we went there, the person who's running this mastermind talked about how he has so many friends in this restaurant. And what I find it fascinating is like he would spend time with all these different people in there, like the bathroom attendant and all the different servers. Like he was so gracious with all of them. Like a bathroom attendant, you'd be like, that's just a person like handing you a towel. But he'd call them his friends. He would generously tip all these different people and created like a really cool relationship with all these different people. And he knew them all by name. They're all people they had connection with. And I thought to myself, that's a really powerful concept. So it was my flight back last night. So I was catching a flight late last night, and I was in line. I was exhausted. I was so tired. We were lining. I switched to my airline because I wanted to stay with the group a little bit longer. So I switched airlines. So I was flying Southwest, which is kind of like a cattle car, right? I mean, it's crazy sometimes, but it worked out, and I got a late flight. As we were kind of lining up, one of the ladies was like, she was kind of confused about where to go. She was this nice older lady, and she was kind of like not sure. And so I kind of saw where she was at, and I don't know, like sometimes I would just be like, well, hopefully she figures it out. But I'd kind of been around these people for the last 2 days of having impact with people. And so I thought, all right, well, let me see how I can help her out. So I asked her if I could help her, and we started to talk a little bit. And then the conversation went pretty fast in the sense that we were talking about a couple different things. She was returning back to Salt Lake, and we talked about where she'd been, and we're just talking in line. And then she mentioned that she lived nearby. She lived actually in American Fork. I live in Alpine, so I'm close by. And she'd mentioned that her daughter had just recently, that day, sent her a home that she should go look at on this website called Willow. I'm like, it's actually called Zillow. But she's like, oh, it is? Like, it doesn't matter. You can call it Willow, I guess. But we kind of laughed about it. And I said, well, if you want help on houses, I can totally help you in that. She's like, and then we talked about how I'm in real estate. And then as we're getting on the plane, she asked me for my phone number, or she asked me for a card. Like, I gave them all out. I don't have any cards, but I can get you, it'd be great to get your phone number. So I got her phone number. Then she took my number. And then now we've got something set up this week, and she'll end up listing a home this spring that she's going to buy something too. But that all came about from just talking to somebody in line on an airplane, right? Like we're just boarding a plane. And it really started because I just was looking at how can I impact and help somebody. And I would say that those simple interactions oftentimes, now if I would have stood in that line and thought, I wonder who in this line is going to be real estate business for me. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that. Looking at this lady, I wouldn't have thought that she would be representing like a potential client. But I think the thing to keep in mind is there are clients all over the place. There are people that you can impact and have discussions with all over. Now, as we move into our conversation today, the question I'd ask you is, like, what are the non-negotiables in your life? So you start to look at the non-negotiables, you start to look at your real estate business, it's going to be critical for you to find, like, what are the things that are boundaries and lines that are just non-negotiables for you? Because you start to look at it, you'll start to decide, like, what are the boundaries that you have in your real estate business? Now, for some of you, you might not know what the boundaries are. Like you might be new to the business and you're like, I have no boundaries. I'll work with anybody at any time, anywhere. And for some of you, you might have been a little bit jaded, and you might have been able to set some boundaries and lines because of past experiences where you've been burnt or you've had a bad experience. You say, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to do that again. And so you start to get a little bit more clarity about how you're going to treat and how you're going to handle people. And you'll have some boundaries around who you work with. And I put a post about this over the weekend in a Facebook group because I was curious to see the responses that would come back as I put the comment out and said, what are the boundaries in your real estate business? And it was fascinating to hear. A lot of the things came back with this concept of respect and trust. That was probably the overriding response was, I don't work with people that don't trust, that I don't trust, or they don't trust me, or that don't respect me. If they don't respect me, I'm not going to respect them. And that was kind of the overwhelming response. I was just curious to see what the market would bear as far as an answer to that. So the question I'm going to ask you right now is, if that's a concern that a lot of people have, and they're not going to work with people who they don't have respect with, and there's no respect that's mutual, then the question I'm going to ask you is, how can you be trusted? So if you're looking at creating trust with people, how can you build trust? Now, one of the things that you'll look at is the NAR stats show the majority of people will work with someone because of their reputation or because of they feel safe and they feel connected with different people. But the question is, like, how can you build trust with people? I would say it's actually two parts. So we need to be trustworthy and we need to trust others. Those are the two parts of how you build trust. Now, we often work to be trustworthy. Like, that's a process that we do. Like, we want to become a version of ourselves that we want to become trustworthy. So we often work to be trustworthy, but we lack the focus of being trusting. So what's interesting is like trust is this two-way street. And oftentimes we're trying to expect other people to trust us when we're probably some of the most distrusting in that experience. So we hold back trusting others until they trust us. So we're going to make sure that they trust us first, and then we'll open it up. And I would say in your world, the question is, who are people that you are being hesitant to trust? And if you're being hesitant to trust, they're not going to trust you. They're not going to lead out with that. You've got to be the one who leads out. Not only do you have to be trustworthy, and that's just a state of who you are, right? Like one of the things that I can't teach, and we could come to a lot of classes, I can't teach you how to be ethical. I don't know. I'm not that good. I'm not that good of a teacher. Like if you're not ethical, like that's a core thing for you. And that's some inner work that you got to work on. But no amount of CE credit. Like, I mean, I know there's a code of ethics CE credit that's 3 hours, but you're not going to go to that 3-hour class and be like, okay, starting now, I'm going to be ethical. Now I'm going to be that kind of person. That takes a lot of work. And if you're not trustworthy, honestly, you wouldn't be at our company. We've let a lot of people go who are not trustworthy, and that's fine. Like they can work somewhere else. But the thing that you really want to focus on is this idea of being trusting. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that money gives opportunity to make choices. So oftentimes we look for like, what are the choices that we want to make in our lives? And the thing to keep in mind is that as you increase your income, as you make more money, you have the opportunity to make more choices. And choices are great. It gives you more opportunities, right? And the flow of money, and as you acquire resources, you get to pick up the opportunity to make more decisions and more choices. But here's a concept I want you to really like have some thoughts around, and that is that we are not defined by the peak of our vision, but by the last stand that we're committed to defending with our lives. So we say that again. We are not defined by the peak of our vision, but by the last stand that we are committed to defending with our lives. So think about that. Like a lot of times, like we look at ourselves as this like highest version of ourselves. And we think that that's the definition of who we're going to become. Like we look at this peak of our vision, we think that's who I want to be. And we've talked a lot about that recently. We've talked about like creating vision letters, and we did a vision board activity for a couple of weeks. And we've like talked about this higher level vision that we're trying to get to this place. But that's not how you're defined. In fact, you're defined by the lowest common denominator, which is like what you're willing to be committed to and what you're willing to hold firm on. In fact, we will live into the minimum version of ourselves. So the version of you that's like the minimum standard, that becomes your life. It's the minimum standard of tolerance that we will do. Like whatever you'll tolerate, like that thing, like that's the toleration, like that's like where your life will be. So your real estate business right now is you're making as much money as you'll minimally be willing to make. Not like the maximum amount, because that's the aspirational place. No, you're guided and defined by the minimum version of you, because that's where you kind of set the bar. And when you start to create a concept around that, like you'll make just as much money as you need to make. And that's what you're doing right now. Like you're making exactly how much money you should be making right now based upon your level of commitment to your minimum standard. Now, the minute you raise your minimum standard, then things change, because now you're not willing to do that anymore. Like you have to set whatever the bar is as your minimum standard. But right now, the minimum version of you is what we're all living into. Like that's the version of us that we're most tolerable, and that's like that's it. Now there are parts of your life that are your probably the best version of you shows up. Right? Like think about the different facets of your life right now. Like you have your spirituality, you have your family relationships, you have your health and fitness, and you have like money in your business. Like think about these different quadrants that you have in your life and start to look at those different places and think to yourself, if I was being graded And these are all different classes, and these are all parts of like my defining persona. In which version of your life do you show up the best? Like, which is the one avenue that if someone came in, they're going to grade your life, and they looked at those different things, they'd say, you'd be like, no, if you're going to shadow me doing this, because this is where I'm at my best. Like, this is where I really stand out. And so I'll use an example. Maybe it's like health and fitness, right? Maybe you are like a defining person who's like, no, man, when it comes to health and fitness, I don't mess around. I'm committed. I show up. I do that. That's what I do. What would be interesting is, what would happen if that same level of commitment became equal in all different facets of your life? Like, what if that same mentality became the minimum standard in your family and relationships? Like, what if that became the minimum standard in your spirituality and your personal development? Like, what if that became the minimum standard in your business? It would be life-changing, because the version of you that shows up in one facet can show up in other parts. It just becomes this new version of you. Now, the thing I would ask you right now is, what are your non-negotiables? And I would say that your non-negotiables in different aspects of your life right now are going to be different. Like, there are certain non-negotiables that are a lower standard in different parts of your life, and you know what that is. Like, I don't even have to tell you what it is. Like, you already know. Like, you know that there's different parts of your life that you feel are not up to the standard that you really want to have. But what has happened is they haven't become non-negotiables. They've become negotiables. Like, you've allowed those things to exist. And that's just a standard that you've created. And the question becomes, how do you shift that? Now, for your real estate business to move forward and get to the place you want to go, you just got to set new non-negotiables. It means that you have to show up differently than what you previously have done in the past. Because if you're going to show up the same that you have in the past, you're not going to get the same results. If you want to show up in 2023 how you did in 2022 or 2021, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a rude awakening in 2023, because you're not going to be able to show up in that same way and have the same results. 2021 and 2022 were like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like running a marathon downhill. Like, the wind was at your back, and the market allowed people to have record-setting years because the market allowed that to exist. And if you think you're going to be able to show up in the same way, you're going to be sorely mistaken. 2023 is going to require a higher version of you to show up in all aspects of life. Not just business. It's going to require you to be a better spouse to the person you're in a relationship with. It's going to require you to be a better parent for the kids that you have. It's going to require you to be a better version of you to yourself. So yesterday, one of the things that was interesting is a conversation that we had around our mastermind group. We talked about this fighting the dragon. And the dragon really is like the inner version of you. So there was a scripture quoted in our group yesterday, and this is not like some sort of religious sermon. One of the guys in our group is actually a pastor, but he wasn't the one who shared the scripture. The question that came up was that there's a scripture, the verse in Matthew. It says, you need to love your neighbor as thyself. You think about that, right? Like when you hear that scripture, it's like, yeah, you should love your neighbors. I get it. But the tailing end of that scripture is probably the most telling part. And that is, you need to love your neighbor as thyself. The question I have for you is, do you really love yourself? And at what level do you love yourself? Because it's easy to go love your neighbor and be able to share and be able to help other people. But the real part of that scripture is the back part of it, which is having a relationship with yourself. And that becomes this inner dragon that we're trying to figure out. How do we become the better version of ourselves? Because if we're going to be caring about other people, it requires us to first care about ourselves. It requires us to become this version of us that's going to show up differently than we have in the past. And the whole premise of that is you become the alpha in your life versus the beta in someone else's life. You can become the best version of you in your own story versus just being a character in someone else's story. Like, it's on you to really to step up, to become this version of you that hasn't existed yet. And becoming like a version 2.0 or a 3.0 of who you are. There are going to be a lot of relationships coming up in this next year. We'll talk a lot about that on our future calls. And it's the one thing you can control, that you're responsible for how people remember you or don't. So don't take it lightly. Now, your interaction with other people is going to come into the direct relationship with how you see yourself and the relationship you have with yourself. So I would encourage you this week to really do some soul searching of who you are, the relationship that you have with yourself, and at the same time, setting some new non-negotiables that become the new standard of living into the highest version of you. And as you start to create those non-negotiables, that's where real success starts to happen. Now, there's going to be a fight there. There's going to be a fight with that dragon of trying to hold you back. And that's where the real fun begins, because then you start to make some real change in your life and real impact.